Okay, so basically gamma radiation, what I like to do with it is to sterilize all my dead outs. The reason why I do it is because I run multiple sites and I have quite a large coverage area. About 10 years ago in New Zealand, I contracted AFB down there. And to shake it out of my operation took around 7 years with burning hives and doing quite a lot of replacement of gear. The honey flows vary quite a lot with Manuka honey in New Zealand. So if you don't have great nutrition in your hives with the AFB, once you've got it, there's no real way of shaking it. They don't allow antibiotics or anything like that. So one of the reasons why I like beekeeping up in the States here is the fact that we have the ability of gamma radiation. The program, I think, has been running for 10 to 12 years. We've been active in it for 4, and we ran it last year, and we're running it again this season. So Extract and Box actually has its own account with Sterigenics as we're trying to develop medical grade honey and different bee byproducts. Okay, so key dates this year. We will be accepting equipment that's pre-wrapped at our main yard, which is out in Chester Springs, from the 1st to the 21st of March. The 22nd, we'll be taking it down to Sterigenics. If we do, we can get 2 trips down there. It's about an hour and a half drive, one-way direction during that time of the year. There has been a significant price increase. It's actually 8% increase with all the inflation that's going on. There's no real reason for it because Cobalt 60's got a half-life of about 5.5 years. It's just they've charged more because everyone's charging more and they're making more. It's corporate, right? They're making more money. So to be cost effective, we need to get 10 pallet loads of equipment. Last year we had 12, so it's not really an issue. Volumes, what can go into a pallet? So effectively, if you break it down between mediums, shallows, and deeps, with that price point, for a deep, it works out this year at $5.95. I think last year it was $5.50. So even though it's 8% up, it's not dramatically increased. When I'm talking deeps, mediums, and shallows, if you have AFB, you want to sterilize everything. You just don't, if you've got any disease control going through, AFB as a spore can be around for, they're now saying up to 70 years. If you haven't burnt your equipment or if Jeff hasn't been out there and thumbed it over, sterilization of your gear is a good way to go. Okay. It's not just the boxes. The value for me is in my frames. So I usually add about 1,200 new frames to my program each year. And that can depend on nectar flow, but for us to draw out a frame per hive, when you're adding up your boxes with a rotation of 3 extractions a season, drawn out frames are worth about $10 each. When you're looking at the Better comb from Hungary, that's imported by Better Bee, that's that artificial pre-drawn that's now valued at $10 a frame. Perico frames are about $1.88 each. That $1.88 is on last year's prices. They're also up now and freight's up. So like frames they ordered in October, they're up to about $2.27 compared to that $1.88, just to show you where everything's going. And that's when you're buying it in bulk by multiple pallet loads. On my website, which has got this list here, shows you all the current literature that's on gamma radiation. Like some of those things that are on the list as you go through don't relate to honeybees, but just it's a good correlation going through. So what we're targeting is for gamma radiation is to get 10 kg-Y, which is basically the saturation point of energy by the mass of the box. So they basically come up with an equation how dense the product is and how much saturation needs to go through. So the grazer, it's a radiation terminology. So when we go down the list, a lot of the things that are in there, like insects and things, giant wax moth, they're all taken care of. There's research that's been out there that shows even some of the viruses which take higher up, there can be partial deactivation. And there's also a residual effect in your wax, so it stays sterile for a longer period of time afterwards. Okay, what's missing off that list? Stone brood. So that's a fungal with spores. Snot brood, they don't actually really know what snot brood is yet. You got sac brood, which usually clears up by itself with good nutrition. Lake Sanini and the Kashmir bee virus are so fine that they haven't really studied them. There's the references for the research. Okay. Last year's gamma irradiation certificate. So the actual dose last year was 16.5. So when you go back to that list, you can go through and check off what it clears off. So this is all on that white page that I'll show at the end. Okay, so the reason why I do it, it's basically we're in a shared overlap with the environment, right? So here's some of my sites that are near the Philadelphia city, which is in the far right-hand side. So when you're looking at overlap, those are 2.5 mile circles. You can see where Westchester is in most of my operations north of Westchester. Any hives within that zone is basically going to affect me, right? So if my bees are out foraging and you've got a dead out there that's got some disease in it, if they're getting not cleaned off and robbed, you can transfer disease that way. So that's one of the main reasons why I offer that program. That and it's cost share. So usually I have about 3 or 4 pallets of my own gear that I want to put through the system. So things that I like to do are like propolis mats because they interchange and I don't know which hive they come off. And if I've got queen excluders that come off hives, they'll go through as well. Most of the time I try and leave all my gear on my hives. So I'll have my hive top feeders on the hives throughout the year, the moisture boards, things like that. That, if you look behind there, is a beautiful frame of cat pupae. That was a flawless frame that I had in some hives that we're breeding from this year. So IPM, integrated pest management options. Number one, do nothing. That sort of hits like 90% of people. The next option you can do is frame rotations. So you can spread out the impact of like pesticides using your hives. So you can rotate frames, put new frames in, scrape off old frames and reinsert them. Hygienic stock, so you can go your breeding options. Core nutrition, so basically feeding your hives so they actually survive winter, right? So I think earlier talking about light hives. With our hive top feeders this year, I was actually short 12 out of 320 odd that I needed. And those hives have had to feed pretty much all winter long with emergency feeding. Even though we're feeding with inverted jars of sugar syrup, they just didn't get the weight gain that you can get with hive top feeders. Supplements, there's quite a few supplements coming out now. There was actually one that I was reading today from Cornell that is basically a microspore sponge that the bees can eat. And that can actually absorb pesticides inside the bees, the hindgut, and then they basically poop it out. So different things coming through. We're also looking at a silver spray from Germany at the moment. So that's a study that we're going to do this year. Normal standard hive medications with miticides, and then your box configuration. Try to have a small space so the bees don't have to overheat a big void. The options that you got is burning old equipment. So even when you replace your gear, don't leave it hanging around. And then know your source for your equipment replacement. And then finally, of course, is gamma irradiation. And then I just have that card there. So if you take a photo of that QR code, that will take you to the website page. Questions?
What format of silver are you using?
Micro.
Okay, it's just elemental silver, or is it like a silver of another molecular makeup?
I've actually signed a non-disclosure agreement, can't go more than that for you. So it's basically a powdered silver that's in a water concentration. Okay. If you go to nano is too small a particle, it will go into your skin, for example. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I can share more next year on that one. I'm caught. Okay.
Excited. I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah. So, for example, what I can share is what we're testing for is against European foul brood. So, Jay Evans, who's the bacteriologist at Beltsville, at the Bee Research Lab, last year we talked, like I've known him for about 10 years. Last year we were talking with him about putting some EFB into one of the pellets in a petri dish and seeing if it kills it off. So when you go through the information earlier up, which is on our website page, European foul brood does not have spores, yet the gamma radiation will kill an active culture, which is what they've shown in research, but it shouldn't be in your frames when we're actually doing the processing. Okay. So we were going to test a petri dish last year, but with COVID, they couldn't even get into their own office. So what we've spoken to them about now is actually spraying some of this silver spray into the petri dish, seeing what the reaction is, seeing what it's like in the hives, and then doing toxicology screening for heavy metals out in California to see if there's any residue. They have tested the product in Austria. It's a German company with a Canadian headquarters. So silver is actually passed already by the EPA, their product, as an ingredient, but I need to check. I've got a call into them about 2 weeks ago to see if it can come in as a final product. So any antimicrobial property that you import into the US has to go through the EPA. Okay, so if someone tips it down the drain, you don't want to kill everything off down the food chain.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So what we're going to do at our main yard here is basically set up pellets like we did last year. And that way, if you're bringing in wrapped equipment that's pre-wrapped, we can just restack it and then everyone can combine on those volumes. So we have everyone from someone like Jeff that will bring in half a pellet load to the people that are bringing in like 1 or 2 boxes. So it really just depends on volume. There was not an outbreak, there was an occurrence of AFB in Chester County this past season. So that beekeeper has got about a pellet load of his own gear that he's going to bring in and sterilize. So in his case, he can't track where he's put his supers. Like, no, most people don't track where they put their supers. So he's going to sterilize all his supers so that he's got no potential transfer between his hives. Okay, so the program is initially for AFB. However, I like it for all the other reasons too. So, for example, if I'm moving into a new yard and I'm taking frames or boxes, used equipment, I know I'm perfectly safe and I've got no issues with transfer. So for me, it's an insurance and a liability issue as well.
Tim, we've set up an event on the 19th of March to collect equipment from our beekeepers here in the city. Do you want us to, I mean, what would be the best way to do that? I could probably, we don't know how much we're going to get, but I could just bring a truckload of stuff out to your place on the 21st and we could stack it, or we could try to stack it.
Yeah, so I have plenty of pellets. My in-laws have a 100-acre farm operation. We do lots with pumpkins and stuff like that, growing pumpkins, which is what got me into beekeeping here. We can simply lay out pallets and just stack them up. Okay. Because of last year, it worked really well because we actually had slightly a longer window. And as people were dropping off, I would get them to drop it off pre-wrapped onto an individual pallet, and then I just stack it up at the end of each day to make up the volumes.
Okay. So I assume everybody should label their boxes so that they can recover them, correct?
Yeah. So if you get a giant trash bag, you can actually put your box in the bag. You get all the air out of it, and then you just tape it closed. Then you're writing your name over the tape. And then what we do is we have 6 pellets out at any one time. Usually we don't get more than that for drop-offs, or people will call me and I'll meet them and unload their trailer with a tractor with forks on it. And we just have the pellets labeled. So they usually just send me a text and say, I've put my gear on pellet A, for example. So then your gear is safe, because then we take it from that site and load it out behind our unit where no one is, and it's secure that way.
Okay. Well, I was considering wrapping them. I don't really know how much equipment we'll get, but we should know in the next week or two, and then we'll figure out what the best way to get it. But we'll. It sounds like the best thing to do is have every box individually wrapped, taped up, and labeled, and that's how we'll bring them to you.
Yeah, so the big aspect that they watch is frames with honey on them. So if people have a problem, ideally you want to extract it first. So as the boxes pass the source of the gamma rays, what basically happens is that the protons fly off and then they cause a chemical reaction that changes the cell structure. So it's almost like rapid boiling, right? So AFB needs, I'm not sure what it is in Fahrenheit, but needs 121 degrees Celsius where water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. So you need to either get to a very high temperature quickly without melting the wax, but it can crack the wax, right? So if you've got honey there on your frames, you usually end up with a puddle of gamma irradiated honey at the bottom of the box. We have to put layers of cardboard down so there's no punches, layers of plastic, and stack it up. It's not really an issue unless it makes a mess, and then they can fine us if there's a puddle of honey on the ground. And it doesn't actually achieve anything for you with your frame because it'll actually change the density of the frame. So you get less absorption per frame if you have your honey still in it.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly tell people not to have honey in their frames. Yep. Okay, great.
Okay. Any other questions?
What about metal? I'm under the impression that your telescoping out of cover is not something you want to have irradiated because they won't activate the metal, or
yeah. So that's a curly one, Jeff. So for example, in New Zealand legally, you don't have to burn your outer cover because it can be washed and there's no contact surface with the bees directly. I'm assuming everyone's running inner covers or something as a liner in between. So they don't actually require them to be burnt in New Zealand. Usually with the metal, you can put a hot torch across it, for example, and that will clear off the disease. And you can also do like a Clorox wash that will take care of a lot of things. So UV wands, that type of aspect, that will work on that metal surface because it's not a porous surface and there's no entombment with the wax or propolis that is going to contain the viruses or bacteria that way.
Gotcha.
Okay. We did a few.
So when you were talking about queen excluders, you were talking about plastic queen excluders, or would you run metal queen excluders?
I'd run metal ones through as well if I had them. I just run plastic because they're cheaper. Like I don't want to have $20,000 worth of stainless steel sitting out in the neighborhood. But yeah, again, with the metal ones, you could put them under a blowtorch and achieve the same thing. So if you're worried about just transfer of disease with your queen excluders, you can just basically heat them up or even put them in the oven and warm your oven up to 320 Fahrenheit, leave them there for 2 hours and you're good to go.
I'll mention one random problem that we had when we were building pallets down at Sterigenics a couple of years ago. Just for Dave, if we're accepting equipment from the club members, like I think it was Bucks County, they brought a truckload of stuff and somebody's bottom boards were attached, attached to the super. So they overhang on the pallet, and I forget what happened, if they ended up taking them back, not doing them or not, but you have to be aware of the overhang on the pallets. So
yeah. So pallets, sorry, Jeff, the pallets fit into like a conveyor system that runs round. So you're allowed like 1/2 inch overhang. So if you put 6 boxes all together at the 7/8 box, which is usually slightly wider in configuration, it's a tight fit. So if they have bottom boards or lids or so forth, we usually just stack them on the top and you end up with a 4 stack instead of a 6 stack. So how we do it is all by volume and we just divide the pallet down. Even some boxes, handles, for example, some guys have got the wooden lugs on the outside of the boxes, which are a pain in the ass when you're trying to move large volumes of gear. But but that's a consideration if the gear can be stacked, or if they're not putting their frames in, they simply turn the box up and put it vertically down another column of boxes. It just depends on the gear.
Is there a diagram or a YouTube that shows what might be problematic in terms of overhang or wrapping or all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so on my website, there's actually a link to the Montgomery website, and they've still got the videos up, Mark Antoon's videos.
Oh.
I tried to make them when I was wrapping the pellets last year. How we just had so much wind over the microphone, you just see me walking around doing stuff, and my lips are moving, but you can't make it out. So we'll make another video this year so we can replace Mark's 20-minute video that should only take 3 seconds to watch. But it does, it goes through it really well in depth on his video.
Tim, I'm driving and cutting in and out. Did you discuss the pricing range?
Yes, I did, Justin. I can bring it back up again for you in a second. There you go. So pricing per pallet was $248.80. It's gone up 8% from last year. And then, so basically for a deep, it's $5.95, for a medium, $4.15, or for a shallow, $3.45. If you're wanting to do bottom boards and things like that, it's basically all just divided by the volume.
Okay.
Okay, so basically a stack on the pallet can go up 75 inches, which is allowing 5 inches for the pallet. There's actually a void of space above it because nothing fits in that area. So you get 70 inches of vertical height, useful height on the pallet.
And can we look at the list of diseases again for a moment?
Yep.
I think you mentioned there was one fungus it didn't do well against. What doesn't it, besides that one, I'm sorry if I missed it. Besides that, what doesn't gamma radiation cure or kill?
There was no research on it. Okay, so I'll bring that slide up. So stone brood is a fungal with spores. So usually it kills off anything with a spore. It deactivates it, right? So it's just stone brood. So usually if you have stone brood, the reason why it's called stone brood is it's so hard that you can't actually get it out of your frame. So most people that have it actually just scrape their frame right back down, if not just discard the frame, right? So it's one of those catch-22s. There's no information out there because they haven't tested it, because the standard method of dealing with stone brood is to discard it, destroy it, or scrape it down.
Now, I'll just clarify, stone brood is not chalk brood, right? Stone brood's pretty like super rare, and it's toxic to humans.
Yeah, so correct. Yeah. Yeah, so chalk brood is on the list. It should be on the list. Chalk brood gets killed off at 10 kgV.
There's a question in the chat asking about 8-frame boxes.
Yes.
Whether they can be processed. I imagine it's a matter of figuring out the volume.
Correct. So anything that fits on the pallet can be done. It's just a matter of standard spacing, right? So 8-frame boxes, depending on how many there are, usually we put them up on the top of the stacks. And that usually, if you've got 8 frames, then you can put on boxes that have or bottom boards. We can stack them up in all the odd configuration at the top of each pallet.
I got you.
Because you just turn the boards the other way.
So for guild members who are listening and who want to do this, we'll have a free free event on the 19th, March 19th, which is a Saturday, I think. And we'll collect equipment and the money to take these out to Tim's. I'll take them out and get them stacked up and everything. And Tim, we'll talk about what the best way is to deal with the money. We'll figure out how to do that offline. But so we're going to do that and try to make this happen. So if you're interested in doing this, go to the website and find the event. It's listed with our events, and there's an Eventbrite where you can sign up and tell us how many boxes you're going to bring. And then we'll be there, and we'll get them all wrapped up, and I'll take them out to Tim's place on the 21st.
Yeah. So anyone that wants to participate in it, David, if you get a master list, we can also send you a copy of the gamma radiation certificate when it's done, if you like that for your records. We can also create invoices, so you get a copy of that, so you can claim it as a business expense.
Yep. Yeah, and if everybody will sign up on Eventbrite, then we'll have all of that information in hand to hand off to Tim and to help facilitate all of that. So Eventbrite is a good way to keep track of all that. So this is great. I'm really glad that you're continuing this tradition. It was a great thing that Mark did for many years. And I think it's a real service to the beekeepers in the area. So this is, I thank you sincerely for doing this. And I think it's a wonderful program.
Yeah, we're trying to start building quite a good rapport with Sterigenics. As I was saying earlier, we're looking at gamma irradiated honey for the hospital use. So last year we actually spoke to Penn Health and looking at having honey put out as with like a food bank option for their patients leaving the hospital. Usually they were giving them like wellness packets as they were going out, especially with the eating disorders and all the way through just change of lifestyle for a lot of their patients. So that was one of the outreach programs we were looking at. So one of the things we're doing this year is opening up our processing facility for people that potentially that can't sell all their honey, and we can extract it for them and get it donated to the hospital program, and then get them a tax certificate as part of that process. So we spoke to the local senator for this area, Chrissy Houlihan, I think her name is. So she came out in the spring and we went through that program. So she actually used to do it about 17 years ago. I think she had hives, and it was one of I think it was a yellow ribbon fundraising event they used to do, was selling the honey and then donating it back to the hospitals. So we're just expanding that to a larger scale.
That's great. I donated all my spare honey to a food kitchen this year, so I think it's a good thing to do if you've got extra honey.
It works pretty well. Like there's one of our customers has got property in one of the townships where you have to do agricultural value over $2,000 to get a discount. I think it's Charleston Township, and then you can get like a discount on your school taxes, right? Because then he's a farm instead of a lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. So in between his tennis courts, we've got 10 beehives, and his honey we process and it goes out to the Chester County Food Bank and also to the Melbourne Pantry. So it's sort of a natural flow and build up from that. So it's something that we're trying to work on.
That's great.
Hey guys, well, thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on email.
Can I ask you one question real quick?
Yes.
Have you run into anything? Is anybody working with certifying organic through the USDA when they're doing the irradiation stuff?
Yes and no. So we have looked at it from New Zealand, and we've also looked at it from having like never ever certification. So I also have beef operations, and with the beef, there's like an area out in near the Grand Canyon that's never been sprayed at all. And we were looking at taking bees out there, for example, and getting a different level of organic certification. Here it's quite hard, and the organic standards keep moving quite regularly. So I'm on the board for the Chester County Ag Development Council, and so I see a lot of the government fine print that comes through that way. And it's hard with bees because they've got such a large radius of flight and foraging. So to get that certification is hard. To put it in into perspective, like PA preferred, for example, we have that certification, and you only require 70% of your own product in the honey to actually claim PA preferred. So you go from one extreme to the other, where I could be buying in like honey from Florida, like orange blossom, blending it into my honey and still claiming it as Pennsylvania honey, right? So if you compare that to the requirements for current certification for organic, where you've got to have like no fertilizer or no insecticides for 3 years and so forth, like the quarantine of what they're doing in the farms is getting smaller and smaller and more relaxed, so more people make it, but then your bees fly straight past that and go through. What we do to try and make a nice product is we're using organic miticides, for example, in our hives. We also have toxicology screening done and check for any insecticide levels inside our hives. Standard screening, however, does not cover glyphosate, which is like Roundup, right? So that's the main one that's out there, and that's a separate charge. So we also look at the nutritional values of what's going into our hives. We've ordered a pallet load of spirulina patties, for example. We've also grown spirulina this year as a trial. And then we're looking at, with the study from Penn State, we should get our data back from our own collection and look at the nutritional level of what's missing and try and get a blend made to meet that and change it as we need it through the season. A lot what we do with queen selection is basically on hygienic behavior and gentleness of the stock, because we do quite a few programs with schools. So we're looking at those aspects as well. But organic's hard. Like you need to do a serious amount of volume before it even pays to get the verification process done. So like we're looking at environmental accounting, for example. So even though I drive a V8 truck here, I've got forestry investments back in New Zealand, and we have to account for every litre, so every third of a gallon of fuel that goes through the system. We equate for the carbon equivalent gases that have been emitted while we're doing any of those procedures, and we're bringing that into our honey as well over here. So, like I was listening to you about the lizards earlier on, like as Jeff was saying, like he's got to check for spotted lanternfly when he goes around now as an inspector. So I'm sure his list will get longer with more legislation that comes through. So I mean, so there are a lot of hoops, and I admire you for doing your courses and looking at the policy side, because I do that with forestry in New Zealand. Like this morning, I had a meeting with Newcastle University in England about policy change. So it's forever endless.
Yeah, because it's the policy about, no ionizing radiation in organic at all, period, in anything, right now. And it's interesting because they specifically say that it's because of consumer preference. It's like, if it's so useful for beekeeping and it's something that's already so hard, to certify, like maybe it's not as relevant because so many people don't certify. But I think that'd be an interesting point. If you're like going to try to move public opinion on anything, bees are a thing that public opinion is always, like, I think, very pro in reality. So that be a very interesting point of starting the conversation, because there are so many things that are just so hard to treat in hives.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got like potentially there's backlash as well, even amongst the beekeeping community about the fact that the honeybees they're exotic, right? So in effect, there's competition with hive densities that goes through the place. I was able to go to Penn State in November. Has anyone ever checked out the beescape.org system? Yeah, so they're doing a next generation of that at the moment. I was able to be a test subject as an industry participant with that. And then what we went through is a series of maps to see what we'd want. So one of them was to create a density ratio, right? So not necessarily naming or pointing out where hives are, but just giving it a ratio of how many bees are hives that are registered are within an area. I'm looking at putting bees in Wilmington City, for example, on rooftops with the largest property owner developer down there. and doing an outreach community program in the city, and talking to Emily White, who's the state apiarist for Delaware. There's 23 registered hives within 2 miles of the center of Wilmington. So that's on the registered scale. I'm sure there's quite a few that are registered, right? And then you've got feral hives that are swarmed, things like that. So different scenarios of dynamics are at play with what you can do. There's also a couple of programs in California for the almond pollination that do drift control and they work out the absorption of bees. There's papers published about natural occurrency of feral hives. So Tom Seeley did one on Arnott Forest, and it worked out that honeybees were every half a mile expanding down through the forest area. So when I brought up that map of what we have, most of my yards only contain 5 hives, and where they do have more than 5, it is because it's either my home yard or it's a breeding station or scenarios like that. So usually I like to keep 2 hives at one spot as a minimum. So then if I have a problem with one, I can keep brood within an apiary yard and balance hives that way. Or else I take it away and create a whole new yard. So even when I'm catching swarms, I do not take them back to any other yard. I have a specific yard that I have just for swarm catching, and set it up that way. Yet there's overlap, right, within the hives, but I try and contain any new introduction of a pest or pathogen in that one spot. But yeah, so organics are hard push, and very hard to do with honey to do it efficiently. And yet there are spots in New Zealand where we've helicoptered beehives out to, and there is no spraying, and we still couldn't get organic certification there, or else the verification cost was like $25,000 to do, and you got to be doing a few $100,000 up to millions to make that recover that cost. Chris is muted.
Yeah, I was watching the Penn State Extension Organic Management course, and the subject of irradiation came up. Let me see if I got this straight, because I couldn't figure out why they said, oh, if you want to do organic management, you can't do irradiation. I'm like, they both said it doesn't make any sense in some ways. And we're talking about Margarita Lopez Uribe and Robin Underwood. We're having this conversation. So let me see if I got this straight. You're saying that it's just because of consumer attitudes that they don't want to do it? Is that?
Yeah, it's based on the fact that it's considered an unnatural process. So the agent that they use is cobalt 60. So cobalt is actually 59. And what they do is they put that cobalt as a slug into a stainless steel shield. They put it into like a nuclear reactor, and then it has basically a proton jump or a neuron jump, depending on which way it goes. So that it then becomes, there's enough energy to make it as a sterilizing agent, but not enough energy in it to become radioactive. So what they do then is spend that in a pool of water, and then they have an exposure limit that they put through, which then creates the photons jump through, which changes the electrons, which changes a chemical reaction of your product. So you do get a chemical change in the matter of substrate that the photons pass, right? So it's basically an energy transfer as that photon's hitting the atoms of the molecule. So when you think of it, you go down the grocery store and all the herbs, right? So your parsley and everything like that, all the McCormick product, that's all gamma irradiated because there's just so much parasitic, not disease, but there's small microorganisms that live through that vegetation all the time. So unless you spray it to almost death and then try and have something that's green in a container, the only other option is gamma irradiation to have a safe product. So you can look at it many different ways. New Zealand, for example, doesn't have gamma radiation facilities, and they were looking at banning gamma irradiated tomatoes coming in from New Zealand, from Australia, which is only 1,200 nautical miles away, from a consumer preference and as a way of protecting greenhouse growers in New Zealand by controlling market supply and basically creating an artificial tariff at the market wharf. with an exclusion zone. So it's politics, it's money, and it's viewpoint. The science behind it, you can take it either way.
Yeah, the only scientific, sorry, I would say the only scientific argument that we kind of came up with my organic classwork was that some people feel that it could change the structure of DNA. And this is a non-reproduction, obviously, at the point of if the meat's already been, from slaughter and process, or, honey. So the question is, when do we draw the line of when something is affecting the genetics in a way that is similar to something like genetically modified organisms via CRISPR or other ways? So that was like the one argument I heard, which was like, when are we changing DNA? But like, that's.
Yeah, no, it's a full argument. So you can go right down the way through, as you're saying, genetic modification, right? Genetic engineering. If you even just look at the corn that's grown for cattle in this country, that's all genetically modified. They grow maize in New Zealand, right? So they don't allow any GMOs into New Zealand. So they're still growing a product and using up all that land mass and land reserves. And the corn only grows to half the height of what the corn does here. So from feeding the world, like hunger strikes and all the rest of it, you can produce a lot more food in a smaller space from genetic engineering. And that's an economics argument. It's all the rest of it too, right? So you have those fundamentals where a country that doesn't allow genetic modified organisms in through, and then you got no radiation facilities. They don't have a nuclear facility. There is one radiation lab in New Zealand that we did with carbon dating with a product called Swamp Carry, which is almost a sub-fossil timber that we reclaim out of peat bogs in New Zealand. And that can be radiocarbon dated. So there's one, I did it 20 years ago off the, I think it's the Waikato University, which is in like the central region in New Zealand. They have a radiocarbon dating machine, and that's the only facility in the country that is at that level of radiation. So,
if you go to the Sterigenics facility and get to go into some of their warehouses, which I did one year to retrieve some of my hives, the place smells like pepper, right? It's obvious that they're processing all of the spices that come in through, from the Atlantic seaboard, a good quantity of them, because the whole place just smells like spices.
Yeah, you're rubbing your eyes the whole time.
Yeah, that must be their bread. That's most of their business, I imagine.
So one of their largest customers is actually gamma irradiated water. So they've got sterile water that goes through for medical application. So it's like you can go back down to the argument of taking antibiotics. Do I really want to feed my bees antibiotics to try and stave off AFB, or do I want to do a simple process like gamma irradiation and just sterilize everything that's dead? I mean, like do you go down the line of then needing a veterinarian certificate, like you're talking about transporting the lizards across state lines? You know what I mean? Like I had to get a letter from Karen. Well, I wanted a letter from Karen last year so I didn't get into trouble of taking equipment across the state line that wasn't inspected. I reached out to all the different state inspectors within like the 5 different states around the area to get verification of what could be crossed, because we're going like from Pennsylvania through Delaware into New Jersey. We had equipment that came down from New York, the Maryland. A lot of these state beekeepers, the apiarists that go through, they're jumping from different universities to different states to get a job, and they're always checking with each other. Half of them don't actually start work until after the gamma radiation program is actually done for the year. Like Jeff, for example, is an inspector. They're usually seasonal employees to get through to the actual apiarist. Like Karen on a good day will get back to me. On a bad day, it might be 2-3 months later, depending on the question that I ask. It's part of the system. So it's kind of nice that now we've got an umbrella policy system going through. We're going to replicate it. Even now there's a COVID release that allows to do self-inspection for people to take stuff across state lines, because the inspectors couldn't get around to inspecting a lot of the gear that was moving, or they would inspect the gear on the way back. So there's different protocols when you read the fine print that you can play around with.
A self-inspection
Yeah,
process?
there was a process. Is it still active, Jeff? Last year, there was a self-inspection where you could take stuff across to wherever it was going. Usually it was for like the bigger operators that are doing inspections on their own gear or have been inspected for multiple years in a row with no problem. And it was a way of not stopping the pollination industry from basically happening.
I'm not sure the current status.
Okay, guys, does anyone have another question? Otherwise, I'm going to go have some dinner. It's been a long day already.
Sounds like there's no more questions. It sounds this is going to be a short monthly meeting. We don't have anybody else on the agenda after Tim. So although our meetings usually run a little bit longer, this one is a little shorter. Does anybody have any final questions for Tim before we let him go?
Does anyone have any stories of what they're doing with their development of their apiary operation? I'm always interested to see what's going on.
You're not going to get to go to dinner tonight if you ask that question, Tim.
Well, it's only 3 o'clock in the afternoon in New Zealand, and it's already a day ahead, so I'm good to go.
Are you in New Zealand now?
No, I'm actually in PA. They've got COVID restrictions that you have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks down there. So I actually haven't been back for a year and a half now. There's no way to get a quarantine bed. I've got a waiting list of 36,000 New Zealanders that are out of the country that can't get back in at the moment. And that even though that number's not very big, they've only got 3,000 beds. So you're talking 100 days in catch up before they can get everyone back. So
that's like 10% of the population, isn't it?
We're a little bit higher now. There was quite a large immigration flux. Actually, Americans are the largest number in the last 2 years previous 2 years for immigrating down there. But it's become a very expensive place to live. Yeah.
Well, any last questions? Any announcement? Justin, do you want to talk quickly about the conference? There's not a big audience, but do you want to mention it?
Yeah, I do. Let me turn my Bluetooth headset off. The microphone isn't very good.
Yeah, stop this.
All right, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so if you guys are new to beekeeping, me and Tim are members of the Chester County Beekeepers Association, and every year we have a big annual conference. Last year was our first virtual conference, and this year will be virtual again on Saturday, March 12th. We have an even bigger lineup than we did last year. I think we had 3 tracks of speakers. This year we have 5. So we're bringing back the beginner track. The club is hosting a Wild Ones native plant track with 5 different speakers. It's going to be really good. Non-members, $40. CCBA members, $30. There's an option to get a gift pack for $15 with the conference registration. That gets you an official conference t-shirt and 2 different packets of native plant seeds. So we're excited about that. That's a great value to add on to the conference. So in the morning, there'll be 2 speakers and then a Q&A with that column speaker before lunch. During lunchtime, it's I think we're trying a vendor breakout session. So different vendors, you can go and talk and ask them about their products or things in their catalog. And then after lunch, we're having 3 more speakers in 5 different tracks. And following the last speaker will be another hour-long Q&A session at 4 o'clock with those speakers from that column's tracks, in case the speech runs the full hour and you don't get a chance to ask your questions. So that'll be very interesting. Most all of the talks we have permission to record and make available for up to 2 weeks after. So you don't have to miss any of the talks. So no FOMO during the conference. That's always hard when you go to a conference and you have to pick which talk to miss out on. So I love that about it. And
Registration is now open on chescobees.org. I'm sure I'll be blitzing some more things on Facebook soon about it, some conference flyers and posters and things like that. So even if you know some gardeners who want to help nature, with true conservation by restoring habitat with native plants, you can direct them into the conference. I'll have a separate flyer just talking about the wild ones aspect of it. So hopefully we should surpass our average 300 attendee. We're thinking, well, we're hoping to get over 400 attendees with this size conference, with the amount of speakers we're paying and the lineup. So it's going to be a really good one. Anybody have any questions? If you've never been to a conference or symposium or anything like that?
I have been to them before, and this one is good. So everybody, I suggest you sign up for it. Justin, send us something this week so that we can post it on our website too, because I'd like to, have a blurb and a link out to your registration form.
Yeah, we'll do. Tomorrow I was planning to do a lot of media blitzing since our conference flyer was finalized and some other information finalized.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Is it different than the one you sent earlier? Has it been updated? Because I think there was one a couple of weeks ago that I
may have just sent that might have just been the save the date one, but now we have a new flyer that one of the committee members designed. It has 6 pictures of a couple of the presenters and some more information, and that little sneak peek block diagram schedule I sent just the guild board. That's been updated also. So we lost one speaker, Hillary Kearney. We picked up another speaker, one of the founding members of the American Apitherapy Society, Dr. Bradford Weeks. So I'm really excited about that. I thought I wasn't going to find another apitherapy speaker for this year's conference. Last year was the first conference I had the okay to bring in an apitherapy speaker. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what apitherapy is, it's basically all the healthy hive products from a honeybee hive. So it's not just bee venom therapy, but it encompasses, raw honey, pollen, wax, every component that can benefit human health. But this speaker last year, Deborah Klugers, gave a general overview of apitherapy and a lot of research studies and information. But Bradley Weeks will be talking more about his experience in 37 years of treating people. He's an MD, and he has treated people with bee venom therapy for various illnesses. So it's going to be a little more specific. So I'm excited about that.
sounds wonderful.
Yeah, sounds great. Anybody else want to say anything before we wrap up here? All right. Thanks everybody for coming. Bring your hives on the 19th, and we'll be publishing and publicizing that a little bit more between now and then. Thanks everyone. Good night.
Farewell.